So welcome to today's PFT webinar that will be officially launching our pilots programs. So I am Laura Brown. I am one of the staff here at PFT, and along with Angela Forelli-Gruber, we will be walking through the introduction here before we turn it over to our speakers. So first off, a quick about PFT for those of you who might not be familiar. PFT, known as the Partnership for Food Traceability, is a public-private partnership with FDA, driving industry-led solutions for electronic interoperable traceability across the supply chain. So really our goal is working collaboratively to streamline compliance with FDA's food traceability rule by developing flexible and efficient implementation frameworks that are built on mutual accountability. So through the public-private partnership, PFT works directly with FDA. They act as a as a technical advisor, and PFT is a standalone organization, 501c, and so we do not advocate FDA for any changes to the rule or anything along those lines. What we do is what you see here on the screen, which is a shared look. We are working with industry to create a shared overarching vision for food traceability across the supply chain to facilitate implementation of compliant traceability programs with the goal of adoption of interoperable electronic traceability systems for FTL foods, while of course recognizing that there needs to be the flexibility to accommodate and support alternative and non-electronic methods for small businesses. All right, let me go to the next slide here, and I think I'm turning it over to Angela to speak a little bit about the pilot committee goals.
Yep, 100%. Thank you so much, Laura. My name is Angela Forelli-Gruber. I'm a senior manager of food safety at the Atchison Group, and I will be facilitating the pilot discussion today. Before we get into the discussion itself, we wanted just to talk a little bit about what the pilot committee of the PFT, the overarching goals were. So we had three main goals in that committee. We needed to identify challenge areas or opportunities in the traceability rule implementation that would benefit from some additional industry testing. Secondly, we wanted to create pilot frameworks to standardize industry problem solving, the approach of it. And then third, we wanted to serve as a central repository for collection and reporting of learnings for the benefit of industry writ large. So all that to say is that the PFT coordinates these pilot programs to hopefully enable a more comprehensive and consistent collection of learnings and to share those learnings with FDA. PFT writ large, or PFT pilot committee itself, we're not designing or managing individual pilots. Instead, what we have created is a consistent framework for conducting a pilot and reporting results, with the hope is that that will make it easier to compare different learnings across participants. And as a public-private partnership with FDA, we hope that we're pretty well positioned to serve as a conduit to deliver all of those collective learnings in one concerted, effortly way. Go ahead, next slide. So the current available pilot frameworks that we have today that we'll be discussing are the three that you see here. We have one pilot about traceability lot code flexibility, so different methods to capture, maintain, and share traceability lot codes. The second pilot is around the creation of an electronic sortable spreadsheet and having the option for PFT to provide feedback on an ESS. And then the third, testing interoperability of sharing data with trading partners. So we're going to talk about each of those pilots today. This webinar will be recorded and will be put up on the PFT website. We will also have a good bit of time during this webinar for Q&A of audience questions, and we hope to get to all these questions live. If we do not, we'll be following up with you directly. And also we will be continuing this conversation on forthcoming pilot office hours meetings, which I'll get into in a few seconds here on the slide. Go ahead, next slide. So on the PFT website itself, and I've linked that address up at the top, you can find information about each of these three pilots. Each pilot framework about each of those areas I just spoke about on the last slide looks exactly the same. It kind of all has the standard a standard way that we have put the invitations together. We're looking right now at pilot 3, the interoperability pilot, um, which is testing data sharing with trading partners. So we're looking at that as a reference, right? And so every single pilot invitation has both a problem statement, it has a goal, a really like well-defined concerted goal that we're trying to get to with different companies doing these tests under this one program area. Go ahead, next slide. For each pilot, we outline a few example methodologies that a company could could use to undertake their testing. We outline what companies in the supply chain this type of pilot might be the most relevant for. And we also add why participating is important for this particular pilot, like what learnings can help inform the bigger industry or FDA regarding the traceability rule implementation. Go ahead, next slide. And then each pilot also includes details regarding example outcomes and outputs from completing the pilot work. So that includes a narrative report template to capture methodologies tested, successes, challenges, recommendations based on your pilot learnings. And those who would like to share pilot learnings can also opt to share either their report or a de-identified summary that PFT makes to FDA only with PFT membership. And also you can elect to post your learnings as a resource on the PFT website. On the PFT website. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so on June 9th, we uploaded a video that walks you through each pilot in brief and outlines resources to point folks in completing pilots in the right direction. And so we do encourage you to check that out. That video is about 50 minutes long. It goes through each pilot. It also has some good feedback from our folks at FDA as well regarding the traceability rule writ large. So a lot of good information there. We encourage you to check it out. Go ahead, next slide. So the website does include all the invitations and also a contact form at the bottom of the page if you're interested for either signing up for a pilot or sharing learnings about a pilot that you and your company has already done in either one of these 3 pilot areas or something else. Folks who fill out the contact form will have the option to be added to complimentary PFT pilot office hours. That's an initiative that we're going to be starting. This will be a Microsoft Teams meeting series that will run July 7th through September, every other week starting at 2 p.m. Eastern for an hour. The agenda of these office hours will be to discuss the pilots in process, provide a forum for collaboratively working through common challenges that some pilot participants might be facing in different companies, and also provide a space to share completed pilot learnings if folks so choose to do so. It's not required, but an option. You do not need to be a PFT member to participate in one of these pilot areas or attend the office hours. So that's a really important note. So, go ahead, next slide. Okay. So to speak more about these pilots, I have invited a few PFT members who worked on the pilot frameworks to provide some additional insight. I'd like to now call up Amber, Andy, and Wiggs. Please introduce yourselves in that order and let us know which pilot you'll be speaking to.
Hi, everyone. Amber Ingebretson. I am a solution consultant at PLM TrustLink, and I will be speaking to Pilot 1.
Hi, Andy Kennedy, so co-founder of New Era Partners, a division of iFood DS, and I will be talking about Pilot 2.
Everyone, Wiggs Tillo, CEO and co-founder of Starfish, and I'll be speaking to interoperability pilot number 3.
Thank you so much, panelists, for your time to be speaking about these pilots today. Now, for all of you on the call, we have Pilot 1 is regarding those traceability lock codes and flexible methodologies. Pilot 2 is the electronic sortable spreadsheet creation. And as Wiggs noted, Pilot 3 is that interoperability pilot, a really nice collaborative pilot framework that we've made. Now, as we get into the questions, I'll have each of our panelists answer a few questions that we've prepared, and then we have the rest of the time open for you, the folks on the call, to ask your questions. you can submit them in the Q&A and we can get to them one by one. All right, so the first question that I have for all of you, for those folks who weren't able to watch the June 9th webinar, can you tell us what's unique about each pilot invite and why it was selected as a focus area?
Sure, I'll go first as pilot number one. So what is so incredible about pilot one is that we're really testing flexible TLCs and TLC source. The goal is to generate real world implementation evidence um, that we can scale throughout the food industry. And knowing that FSMA 204 was probably created in a lab or pen and paper, what really works? And so that's why I believe why pilot number one is so important. It's not about proving that you have all the answers. It's about learning what works in the real world before FSMA 204 compliance in 2028.
So, the motivation for both Pilot 1 and Pilot 2, thinking about TLC source and TLC flexibility and the electronic sortable spreadsheet, kind of was motivated by Congress. So they helped out a lot with this with these first two pilots. So in the Continuing Appropriations Act, Section 780, Congress gently asked FDA to consider being a little bit more flexible with how traceability lot codes work and reach out to industry and engage with industry on traceability lot code flexibility. And so they published the discussion document, which lists a number of different flexibilities that the industry has brought up. In addition, so deeper down in the fine print of Section 780, there's a little section that talks about FDA having to do data intake exercises to test the capabilities of FDA's product tracing system. So in preparation for that, FDA hasn't really discussed how they're going to do that yet, but we took that concept and ran with it. So pilot number 2 is all about creating electronic sortable spreadsheets that you can share with each other, with FDA, with PFT. So the idea is, as part of the pilot program, actually rolling up your sleeves, creating the electronic sortable spreadsheets, and demonstrating that you can do it. Because it's one thing to say you can do it. It's a totally different thing to actually do it and show other people in the industry what you're thinking your sortable spreadsheet might look like. Waves?
Well said, Andy. So for pilot 3, what makes interoperability really interesting for FSMA 204 and what makes FSMA 204 really interesting is, as a federal law, this is a law that requires not just compliance within the four walls of your own company, but sharing data with your trading partners. And that's really interesting because a company with a fantastic recall process with good visibility into how they're handling their products could be doing really well with compliance internally, but maybe non-compliant because they're not receiving data or sharing data with their trading partners. So in order to share data, you need systems and platforms to speak to one another. Many companies use different types of ERPs, WMSs, traceability systems, and oftentimes those systems use different data formatting, different labels for how they structure the data. Very commonly, the operational structure of the data also doesn't match how other systems might view this data. So getting through this challenge of allowing systems to talk with one another, allowing you to share data with your trading partners so that you and your company are compliant, but also your trading partners are compliant, and trading partners that depend on you can also achieve compliance is a really important piece of this federal legislation in particular. So interoperability is all about facilitating that data sharing, making sure that parties can share data where it needs to go in the right format so that trading partners can receive it. Back to you, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you, three. All right, the next question that we have is, for each of your pilots that you're discussing today, can you provide an example of a known traceability rule question or challenge area that each pilot can test? Anything specific or interesting to you?
Sure. I'll go first. Again, pilot one. Really a significant challenge is the communication between each node of the supply chain. And specifically for distributors that are kind of in the middle. So you have a supplier on one end, and your restaurant or grocer on the other end, receiving definitive traceability lock codes from the manufacturer and then being able to share those with your client is not easy or hasn't typically been done consistently in the industry. So with pilot number one, it provides an opportunity to evaluate whether calculated or inferred TLCs will accurately represent the product that was shipped while maintaining an appropriate level of traceability that the FDA is looking for.
So
Okay.
kind of building on what Amber mentioned, so there's the lock code flexibility approaches for how you handle that. Um, Once you have the information collected in your receiving, and if you do transformation at a facility or create shipments, at, once you have that information stored, shared with your trading partners, as Wiggs is doing with interoperability, how do you take that information and prepare the electronic sortable spreadsheet? So some of the questions you might answer in a pilot are some of the detailed questions that come up when you prepare a sortable spreadsheet. So, for example, if you use Excel for your sortable spreadsheet and you're doing a transformation record, you have multiple inputs, multiple outputs in a process. Well, how do you want to represent that in a spreadsheet? Spreadsheets aren't great at connecting many to many. So you have to make some decisions on how you want to represent that. Do you repeat each output line for each input line, for example? So thinking those things through as you're generating the sortable spreadsheet is really important. And then when you tie in what's being done in pilot one with inference or multiple lot codes being presented to FDA, how would you represent that in the sortable spreadsheet? Do you provide weightings, any kind of analysis? How do you represent that in the sortable spreadsheet? That inference method. So you can really kind of build on what you're doing in pilot one as you get to pilot two and need to create that sortable spreadsheet for FDA. So those are a couple different ideas, and certainly, spreadsheet formats are not restricted to Excel. You can also do them in JSON format or XML format, EPCIS. So you may even want to go further and say, look, I want to go beyond the spreadsheet. I want to try some different data sharing technologies altogether, because FDA is really not too particular about how they get the data, what format and structure. They just want the data. So this may be a good opportunity to share with them different formats that you're thinking about. Wix?
Andy. So as with pilots one and two, where there's a lot of flexibility on how you're capturing traceability lock code, KDEs and CTEs, and submitting to the FDA, there is also a lot of flexibility about how data can be shared between systems. There are many standards in practice today, standards like GS1 EPCIS for event-based supply chain information. There's GDST, Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. There's EDI, which is used for many commercial transactions, and many ASNs within the EDI language or EDI protocol contain elements required for FSMA 204 compliance. Now, to bring all that together is a big challenge across supply chains, and there are important questions that we can run tests on with these pilots around when I, as a supplier, send lock code information and KDEs for a shipping critical tracking event to my customer. Does it survive the handoff intact across those two different platforms? Depending on what language I'm using, does it actually translate properly? Or is information getting dropped, renamed, or mismatched along the way? Something as simple as calling something a purchase order, fully written out, or calling something a PO could not stand the test of translation for something that seems obvious to us in real language, but if coding isn't done properly, that could not translate properly. So running these tests in the real world with real data is really valuable to make sure that when we need to share this data, it's ready to be done in practice. Back to you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you all for those responses. And it does really seem like we've got a potential of a company to have some good flow between testing the first pilot and then moving on testing the third and the second and the third, right? They're kind of perhaps all the things that a company would have to prepare for in terms of getting ready for the food traceability rule. So the last question that I have prepared before we turn it over to the audience questions is a little bit of a thinker, right? So here we go. The intended goal of sharing learnings from these pilots is to help inform FDA on flexibilities, feasibilities, challenges, and opportunities relative to traceability program implementation. Can any three of you give examples of what some of those learnings might be and how they can support companies preparing for FSMA 204 compliance states, the compliance state?
Yeah, I think the most important part about PFT pilots, all three of them, is that we're giving companies a structured way to answer some of these questions, but using your own operations and not assumptions by the FDA. So, one of the things I like most about pilot number one is that it encourages cross-functional collaboration. So within a company, this is not just a food safety project. This is supply chain, operations, IT, BI, warehouse, quality, compliant, FSQA, procurement teams. So everyone is touching food products differently, and everyone has something valuable to contribute. So often the biggest benefit isn't just regulatory readiness, it's also discovering the opportunities to improve within your own business processes. So, yeah, I think that with the FDA rule establishing, what information needs to be available during a traceback, and providing that flexibility and how to deliver it, I think that companies, especially, well, within the food supply chain, you really can maintain confidence in lot level information that you're sharing. Because what's good for one of us is great for all of us. So it's not just about one company sharing. This is about how do we, as a food industry, how do we share our learnings? And then what you're documenting, what you're testing, what worked well, what challenges you encountered, what recommendations you'd offer to not just the FDA, but also to your peers. And again, I'll just say you're not expected to have a perfect implementation. We we just want to learn. We just want you to share so we can learn from each other.
So for sharing the electronic sortable spreadsheet to PFT for evaluation and assistance in terms of polishing up that information so it can be ready for the FDA. FDA will be on the calls and will be participating, so they will get some visibility into what people are thinking. And that really helps FDA better understand how to ask for the data. Because this whole process really starts, the sortable spreadsheet really starts with an outbreak investigation. And FDA investigators, once they determine potential locations where an outbreak has occurred, they have to prepare what's called a data request. So having that data request being understandable by the recipient, and so that there's common expectations about how that data will be shared is so important, because if FDA can receive the data and quickly process it and start their outbreak investigation immediately, and the data is complete, has all the information they need to understand the data being provided, they can really get going very quickly. If they have to keep going back and asking for more information because it's not clear, that slows down outbreak investigations. So this, in pilot two is really the opportunity for FDA to see what people are really going to present in the case of an outbreak investigation. So this way they can fine tune their education, their FAQs, also their data requests when an outbreak happens. They can be more clear what they expect people to provide. But when you're in the middle of an outbreak investigation, it's kind of too late. I mean, your systems are what your systems are. There's only so much you can do with it. Right now is the time to get out in front of that so that people have 2 years to prepare their systems to be better ready to respond to that outbreak investigation. So understanding what FDA will ask for and understanding what they can do with the data, how they can process it, how they can handle it, on both sides, FDA and the folks submitting data, this is that window, that time where people can really have that discussion about what kind of reports, what kind of sortable spreadsheet, what kind of additional data do we need to add to our traceability plan to explain how our traceability system works, explain how this sortable spreadsheet works, and little things like address, for example. Do I put the entire address in one cell in the spreadsheet or do I break it up? You know, and if I send over a spreadsheet and it has things like GS1 identifiers in it, and I'm not careful and I drop off the leading zeros for a UPC, guess what? FDA is not going to know what to do with that, 10-digit UPC. There, so little details like that. This is the time to get that worked out and get some examples flowing back and forth. And if you're worried about confidentiality and you're worried about like data being shared with PFT or anything, blind your data, put example data in. The main thing is the data format is understanding, it's not that we're going to do an outbreak investigation. It's, we want to provide feedback in terms of, did you include everything that's in the rule? Is it structured in a way that people can read it? Is it, have you interpreted the rule differently than other people? So it's like hammering out some of those issues. It's not really about the data itself. You can put in whatever location address and company name you want, product name, you can totally make that up. Really what's important is that data structure in the spreadsheet, how you want to share it. Wait.
Andy. Something I think Amber and Andy both highlighted really nicely is participating in all of these pilots is an opportunity to join a group of peers in industry that are also working towards the same shared goal, compliance with FDA's FSMA 204. And the biggest benefit of this program is structured pilots allow us to create a feedback loop of everything that we're seeing, everything the FDA is seeing, everything PFT is seeing, that is all fed back to you to help enhance and accelerate your efforts, make it easier, faster, and more achievable to become compliant. For interoperability in particular, there's some elements that I think are really interesting that we'll learn as a group around things like a short list of the data fields that typically break in transit so that teams know what to fix early on instead of trying to be perfect off the bat. You can target the most common offenders, right? Things like concrete effort. How long does it actually take for connections to be built? Right? How long does it take to integrate with different systems? How long does it take to translate from one language to another, right? Or one data standard to another? And again, which fields cause most of the headaches? And then also different variations and feedback around different sizes of companies, feedback for the largest companies and how their teams have handled this with sophisticated technology teams, or maybe the smallest players that don't have technology teams or platforms or even systems to begin with. How do they collect the records and what's best practice for what others have seen that are participating in these programs? So again, we're all really supportive of this program, but there are really incredible benefits to that feedback loop that everyone can gain by participating. Back to you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you so much for some very specific and helpful examples in your answers to these questions. I really appreciate it. I think now what we're going to do is open it up to audience Q&A. I do have one question in the Q&A that we can start off with, and others feel free to enter your questions into this Q&A. We'll be sure to get them answered as they come in. So the first question that we have is, for pilots 1 and 2, how do you choose potential flexibilities before the FDA has solidified on specific policies? And after the June 15th FDA public meeting, we saw that different sectors want different and conflicting paths. How did you determine which to use for your pilot to make sure it is useful given the flux and wide range of potential flexibilities? I'll throw that to pilots 1 and 2 folks first. And I also will say that we did outline in the invitation a few potential methodologies to consider when doing your pilot, including definitive TLCs, ranges of TLCs, calculated, and probabilistic. So there are a few options, and then I'll give our experts some time to talk about what their thoughts are too. Go ahead, experts.
Yeah. Andy, if you'd like to take this one.
Sure, yeah. So So, all right. The in terms of how do we do this in this kind of interim period until we get final determination from FDA about how they want to handle flexibilities? That is exactly the point of doing these pilots right now before they've decided on how they're going to handle flexibilities. It's to help provide information to FDA about, for example, some of the questions that they asked um, under the reasonable range pilot. FDA asked, well, how do you determine a reasonable range? So there's a great pilot question to ask and answer is what would you consider a reasonable range? What would be your methodology? What are the guardrails? How is that information communicated to FDA in your traceability plans that says this is my reasonable range? A question that came up under inference is, for if you're going to do inferred traceability lot codes, where do you cut it off? Like at what point where do you say too many TLCs are too many? So that's one of the questions that FDA says is like, do you send every possible TLC that could ever have been in the warehouse for the last 3 months? Or where do you cut off based on the inference method? So another question that came up, and I think one of the things you were talking about, like there's different approaches that people brought up in the public meeting. You know what? Test both. Like test both and provide feedback and say, we tried X and we tried Y, and these were the results. And we found there were benefits to both methods. There were issues with both methods. Provide that information as part of the pilot. You don't have to pick a side. You could just say, this is what we saw. This is what we observed. So eaches, returns, food waste recovery, intercompany shipments, retail transformation, data standardization. Those are all topics raised by FDA in that discussion document that they want feedback. So I would look at all the questions that FDA put into that discussion document, rich topics for any of these pilots. And when you have TLC flexibility, it has a direct and substantial impact on the sortable spreadsheet. So you could even combine the two and say, I'm going to do TLC flexibility and the sortable spreadsheet, and think how they work together. So yeah.
If I could add just a little bit to that as well, I think Andy covered it really, really nicely. I'd propose and suggest to the folks listening in, I'll share that a lot of our approach here has been focused on the challenge points. Where does traceability break down? Where does FSMA 204 have the most difficulty? Notably, so far, we've identified scanning on outbound from distribution centers as a very difficult logistical challenge to solve for, right? Operationally, it could be too costly to manage, but there are solutions out there that can help. Things like RFID, things like calculated lot code, probabilistic lot code, models that have been designed and proposals that we are validating that can get us where we need to go. The eaches problem is another that we're still working through, and we're building hypotheses of how to solve those challenges. If there are other challenges that we can also test for, we'd love to hear from the industry so that as a group we can address them and build hypotheses that we can test together and find remediations for and bring that back to the FDA. So this is an opportunity to test those pain points, the challenges, identify where flexibility is needed and where we can still get the FDA what they need to maintain a safe food supply chain.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Well, we've answered that one question in the Q&A. While we wait for others to come in, I do have a few on deck that I could ask our panelists while people get thinking. So, question for you panelists, what's your perspective on how participating in pilot office hours might benefit companies working on a pilot? That's for anybody.
I'll jump in. I'm an advocate. I want to go ahead, Amber.
No, go ahead, Wakes.
A strong advocate for participating, and this is all about collaboration with other members of the industry where you can hear questions live. We have great discussions in these office hours, and there will be more questions that come up around how to execute pilots, how to manage challenges as they come up. So it's a great place for people to join, ask questions, have conversations, discuss how we can get this done together. And you're going to find a really supporting, knowledgeable group that's there to hold your hand through the process. So a lot of resources available to you that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, I would also like to
Yeah, go
encourage
ahead.
I would also like to encourage that if you have trading partners who would be interested, so it's not just you, but someone that you'd like to, whether it's a supplier or customer, um, to join these office hours together and ask all the questions that might still be out there, and whether you want to participate or not, we're here. We're here to help, and yeah, the more the merrier.
And I would say, office hours is a good time to, as you're thinking about what kind of pilots to run, find out what's already been done, what's already out there, because there may be something kind of similar, either that one of the DSCSA drug supply chain pilots, some of the pilots that were done already under the GS1 flag. IFT has run a bunch of pilots and they have a bunch of resources. So there may be some cool resources where you can see something similar and then you can build on it and extend it. So that's always helpful. So I think, and also from a pilot design perspective, like really understanding what kind of works in a pilot and scoping it appropriately so you can get it done. Because that's one thing that I've run into, pilots that just never end. And so getting some advice and tips on, like, have I overscoped this pilot or have you underscoped it? Are you not being ambitious enough? And in hashing it out with the group, you can maybe get some ideas on how to make it a little bit bigger and more impactful. So I think, sharing upfront before you dive into a pilot. Don't just show up to a meeting and say, here's our finished pilot. And that way, you really haven't taken the full advantage of the power of the team.
And I will add to that. I think what I mentioned earlier about the cross-functional teams within your company, inviting them, whether they're IT or procurement, there might be questions that come up that we can have experts, help answer or find the answers to. So I would just encourage everyone to join as much as they can and bring people along with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, we're still waiting for some questions to come into the Q&A, but while we do that, I do have one other one we can ask. So for each of you, how would someone specifically get started for each of your pilots? Any ideas?
Gosh, I'll just go first again and keep harping on cross-functional teams within your company. I think that it does take so many people within a company to understand it's not just regulation, but it's also what's best for the entire company, and it's good for the industry. What's good for one of us is great for all of us, and we are all serving food to over 300 million people in the US. And all we want with FSMA 204 is to make sure that we're serving safe food. And if it isn't safe, we can remove it from the food supply chain as quickly as possible. So I think that would be my number one recommendation. We're all in this together. So no matter what department you're in, we're all doing this together.
I'll add in, as far as the getting started process, it's important that each company finds a way to fit the pilots that they're looking at into their own process for getting ready for FSMA 204. In some cases, if flexibility is the most important aspect and the most challenging aspect, it's important to get started on that sooner rather than later and test out your hypotheses on what you think will work and provide feedback to the FDA on what flexibility you think is necessary. If you're already in really good shape, but you just haven't tested that last step of the journey, which is submitting data to the FDA, then go ahead and test that out and see if you can actually end-to-end get the data you need and send it to the FDA. Now, the FDA won't be evaluating necessarily the comprehensiveness or accuracy of the data, but they are evaluating that um, formatting, right, of the data. So it's an important check, but also, collecting the data interoperability is another key piece. So see how it fits into your journey. There may be cases where all 3 pilots fit into your journey and you can check them off one by one and work your way through these pilots, or maybe the case that 1 or 2 in particular are best suited for you. And I think, Angela, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there are other pilot categories as well that folks think are important, we can add additional pilots to the queue, right? So it's not just these 3 that will always be the only 3 pilot categories. We'll keep adding additional pilot categories. And so, again, open call for feedback on what can be added there as well.
I'll keep my answer short so we can get to the additional questions. Budget, go ask for budget for your pilot. Make sure you have the resources to really do a good job, and that you have alignment within your organization to go do it.
Wonderful, fabulous. Some really helpful insights there. All right, we have a few questions here. I see some in the chat and some in the Q&A. I'll go right down the line. So the first question we have is, what will the FDA be doing to participate in the pilots?
Yeah, I'll try and tackle it. So in our various meetings with PFT, when FDA participates in the meeting, they can provide input, they can answer questions that as long as it's kind of based around what is publicly available information. So they can't invent policy, they can't come in and say, yeah, this flexibility is going to be approved or not approved, but they can certainly reference resources that have already been published, either FAQs or resources that are available, and help answer questions. So they can point you to the resources that are out there, which is really helpful. And they can clarify some of the language. Maybe if you don't understand exactly what an FAQ is saying, they can kind of rephrase it in more or less legalese language. So that sometimes that's helpful. So yeah, they tend to participate and as kind of thoughtful observers with and they've been given the mandate by Congress to engage with industry. So they're about flexibility and things like this. So they are being actively encouraged to participate and have those conversations.
Thank you, Andy. Any other panelists have anything to add to that one? Great. Okay, the next question in the Q&A comes from Donna Clemens. Is there value to non-industry members participating in a pilot, or are you looking specifically for industry members? In my extension role, I develop resources and offer technical assistance to the produce industry.
Jump in and say, Don, I think folks in your position that do work with industry participants would be well positioned to help support industry participants in working on these pilots, right? The folks you work with in the produce industry are probably great candidates to participate in any of these pilots. And I think you could be a really important person to help support with your expertise and your role, their participation in these pilots. It is important that at its core, we have food companies participating in these pilots, right? We need data, we need examples, we need real world situations that we are testing. So from that perspective, it is important that we have the core entities participating be food companies that are affected by FSMA 204. But that being said, if you work closely with them, then by all means, you should encourage them and work with them to participate.
I agree. The more advocates we have, even if they are food supply adjacent, the more advocates and knowledgeable people sharing the word about FSMA 204 and about these PFT pilots, the better.
And I will also add, we tried our best to make the invitations explicit in step-by-step how to go about writing up your learning. So what success would look like. So, and also paired with the office hours, we do hope that those will help walk folks down the path of exactly how to do that. And in your role, you can also support the journey of doing a pilot. And or collect different learnings together from a couple of different industry members and put them up the chain. I could see a couple of different ways that you can participate. All right, I have another question here in the chat. If we are to join a pilot, what is the recommendation for those who would participate in this space, and or how would we engage in the various departments in our business to make this the most effective / resource engaging pilot in our own businesses during the pilot?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. One thing that I found effective is turning these opportunities into a chance for people that don't normally work together on such a thing to get together and discuss the idea rather than like push an idea out to them and say, we're doing this pilot, this is what we're going to do, and everyone get in line. Go the other way around and say, this opportunity is out there. Let's have an ideathon or a hackathon within the company, within the organization, to come up with ideas. And we like make it a 2 or 3 hour invite. People come in, have pizza and soda, and hang out and talk about the ideas, and then have people pitch the ideas and say, our working group came up with this idea, pitch it, and then the idea that is selected, that group now feels like responsible for it. It's their idea, but have people from different departments in each group so that they can kind of come up with these cross-functional ideas, but make it into a competition, make it a little, fun and engaging. So it's not just, someone in a lab comes up with an idea and pushes it out to the rest of the company. Try and get as many people involved as possible. Competition's always great, and getting lots of people collaborating together to come up with this idea, you'll end up with a lot better ideas coming out of the process. And who knows, there may be multiple ideas that you decide to pilot because they're so good.
Yeah, the buy-in from cross-functional stakeholders would be incredible if you have those kind of exercises. And then I also think it's the what's in it for me, the why behind what we're doing, and not just regulation, but what it does for our business.
Wonderful. So while we wait for a couple more questions to come into the Q&A, I've got a few more on my list I can go through if we'd like. So we did talk about a few resources that might be out there to help folks understand what to do for each pilot. Were there any other specific resources that we wanted to bring to the front? And we will follow up this webinar with a list of resources, and we'll be sure to post them on the PFT website page as well, for more support to get you started. But anything that we haven't already talked about that you guys would like to bring up?
One in particular that I'm especially excited about is coming from PFT, which will be an effort to consolidate all previous pilots that have been done, both within pilots 1, 2, and 3 lanes and outside, testing different aspects of traceability over the years. So learning from those that have done these pilots, that have worked on these types of projects, worked on traceability over the years. This is not a new concept. This is a lot of challenges that companies have faced and solved in the past. So providing a centralized, consolidated view is going to be coming soon from PFT. They're working on the website right now. And I personally am really excited about seeing that, seeing how things can come together, and especially a framework where you can compare different aspects of these pilots together. What were the learnings? What were the biggest challenges? What were the timeframes involved? And what made them successful and what made them unsuccessful in cases where pilots might not have had the outcomes we were hoping they would have?
I agree. We have to, as a food supply chain industry, we need to stand on the shoulders of people that came before us, retail, pharma. This is not new technology or infrastructure. We're just now kind of catching up in the food supply chain industry. So let's learn from those that went before us.
And I posted and it'll go out through the chat, the Leafy Greens pilot that was done in 2020 with FDA and a number of the trade associations. So it was kind of a cool pilot, and we'll give you an idea, how to make it a little bit more fun and engaging. We actually had a secret shopper go out and buy some salads, and then actually do a trace back of that product. But the way we made it more difficult was the secret shopper held the product back for a while and only disclosed the information after product had pretty much left the shelves. So really simulated a real traceback. So you had to rely on your record keeping. So it was pretty cool, pretty fun pilot, and they did the folks that worked on it did an excellent job. So yeah, so I definitely would take a look at that. Um, yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, we've got one question in the Q&A. We are going to get the leafy green report in a link to the chat. We're sending that through right now. Hopefully we're able to get it while we're all on the call. And if we aren't, we'll be able to send it to you as a post-call note. We do have a question here. Hi all, I've just transitioned into a recalls and traceability rule within the food distribution, and I'm trying to get up to speed to the requirement of the food traceability rule. Have you got any recommendations on the best resources to use that summarize and explain the requirements?
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I go to YouTube for everything, whether I'm trying to do a DIY of my house or trying to learn something new. So I would say the FDA YouTube website probably is the first one I would recommend. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think the main FDA rule page, and we can get that posted. And I think that's on the PFT resource page. So if you go look at the PFT resource page, all of the information you're looking for is going to be out there. But if you want to cheat and do it in a quicker, more user-friendly way, Claude is actually really good at summarizing the points of the rule and creating a little synopsis for you. And it does a nice job of linking off to the resources. So, or Copilot, sorry, Copilot, Copilot's right now deleting all my emails because I mentioned Claude. So, uh, yeah, yeah, the AI tools are great at summarizing and providing the resource links too.
We got to thank you from the Q&A. You are so welcome. I will say on your AI tools, we trust, but we also must verify. So anything that it is telling you, you must verify that it is accurate using the FDA links that can be linked on the PFT resources page. All right, any closing words from any of our panelists before we do an overall closing for the webinar?
Thank you all for joining. This is really exciting work, and I've said this probably 3 times already, but please keep providing more feedback on what pilots are important. Please keep building hypotheses and identifying challenges that we can solve together. I think as a group, we're going to be much more effective at solving these challenges, and there are challenges out there. So appreciate all your time.
Yeah, absolutely. It will take a village for sure. So thank you for everyone spending time today and in the future. Look forward to seeing you during our office hours.
Yeah, and thanks, Angela for hosting and asking the great questions, and Laura for organizing us, and PFT for putting this together, because really having the opportunity to pull the industry together and work on these things, it's so critical because the communication between the thousands and thousands of food companies that need to share data, collect the data, provide sortable spreadsheets to FDA, capture traceability lock codes. It's going to be a team effort to do this. And if you're wondering, why should I do these pilots? Why should I spend the time? Why can't I just do a pilot off on my own and not share it? Well, this is the opportunity not only to learn from others, but also teach others. because it's important that we educate FDA and we educate our peers how we're thinking about it, so that this way people aren't surprised come July 20th 2028, like, oh my god, I didn't think anyone would ever think that a sortal spreadsheet looked like that. Like, so it's really good to get out in front of this and have the opportunity to share with each other how we're thinking about doing the rule, because there's no one right answer, because unfortunately FDA couldn't pick a technology, so they said have at it. So yeah, so here we are figuring it out.
Well, thank you again to all panelists who have taken the time to answer some questions about each of the pilots. I think we might have one more slide that brings us back to a call to action for everybody on the call.
Can you see my screen yet?
I think it's rendering.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Perfect. So again, if you're interested in getting more information about a specific pilot or figuring out where to start, or if you have done a pilot in one of these areas or another area of interest relating to traceability rule information and would like to discuss sharing these learnings, please fill out our interest form. It's at the bottom of the pilot program website page on the PFT website, and someone will be reaching out to you promptly. Back to you, Laura.
Thanks, Angela. And as you heard from Angela and our speakers today, you need not be a PFT member in order to participate in the pilots programs. However, if you are interested in joining PFT, we absolutely welcome having you. It really is an opportunity to give your organization a voice and a seat at the table for PFT as the industry is working together to build towards compliance. And that 2028 deadline for FDA's food traceability rule. So you have a little bit of that information here on the screen. You can find more information on our website, on the Join Now page, or on the membership page, or you can always reach out to me as well. So with that, thank you again to our panelists, Amber, Andy, and Wiggs, and of course, Angela, for being our fearless leader for today. So with that, thank you, everyone. We'll be sending out an email with a link to the webinar today, as well as some resources. So if you have any questions, please reach out, and we look forward to seeing you participate in one of our pilots.